I have had the unique opportunity of being a part of urban India and at the same time uh, spent a lot of time in rural India. I have stayed with farmers, I have stayed across states in the rural environment, and I have um, had the time to learn about the way they uh, go about, the way they think, the way they do their work, the way they engage with outsiders. In this video, I'll try to put forth my understanding of rural India to you. Firstly, one must understand that rural India is very different from urban India. Now, why I'm saying this upfront is that I have seen lots of organizations who try to take the products which have been successful in urban India, try to reduce the cost of it, and plonk it to the rural India. And obviously, it doesn't work, and then they withdraw after some time. The next thing one must understand that rural India is not poor. They have different requirements. Their needs are different. They are in a different scenario altogether. That is to be understood. And the third thing one must understand is that rural India is fiercely different from each other. So every village that you go to, though they might be just a few kilometers apart, they will be significantly different from each other in terms of cropping pattern, in terms of culture, in terms of how they engage with urban India, in terms of the level of education. Every bit of it is fundamentally different. So one cannot have a categorization called rural India. I have heard companies have segments which say rural India. There cannot be a segment like rural India. Now, what I'll try to do is to capture my thoughts on four headings, and let us first try to understand the livelihood that rural India has to offer. Of course, we all know agriculture and related services. What it means to say is that, you know, there is a tractor which might be needed, there is a pump set which might be needed, there are seeds which are needed, there is fertilizer which is needed, there is pesticide which is needed, and there is labor which is needed. Remember, agriculture is a very labor intensive offering. Next are the government officers. There is a huge government presence in rural, which are from the health sector. These people can be from the schools, they can be from an extension of government, which is the NGOs. A lot of the presence of this sector is there in the rural markets. And the third are the businessmen. There's a huge set of traders who are there in the rural markets, and along with it, the complete setup of mandi, the markets, the buyers, the people who move the goods, the transporters. So many such businessmen, and of course the service sector. Service sector, by which I mean the barbers, um, the people who would repair the tractors and all. The banks are there, and we also have the beauticians. Yes, in rural India, there are beauticians today, and women do go for some beauty products. The one thing is the other thing to understand is the income and the spending patterns in rural India. Income and the spending patterns, as we know from the various Indian festivals, income and spending pattern in rural India is highly driven by cropping pattern. So as and when the crops are to be sown, or when the crops are to be harvested, that is when a lot of festivals happen. And typically after the crops are sold, that's when a lot of spending happens in the rural. That's when income also happens. Now this pattern needs to be understood, because while the whole sales process in rural is highly credit based, and it's highly manipulated. So largely because of the lack of government presence or any law and order scenarios being there, the whole system works very poorly and very inefficiently. And as a result of that, the farmers very often do not make the maximum money in this whole game. The next, we need to understand the dominant players. Who are the dominant players? Due to the inability of the government to reach to this community very fast, as they are in spread out locations, the panchayat, which is a elected collective authority of the rural um, villages, is a very strong setup. The panchayat has a very strong say in the rural scenarios. The other dominant players are the traders, because trader literally controls the lives of the small farmers. The small farmers would take loans from the traders, buy seeds and fertilizers from the traders, pesticides, and then also when the produce is there, the first right of refusal of the produce is with the trader. So only when the trader, then out of that, trader takes his part of the produce to square up with the loans that he has given, and the rest of it the farmer normally goes to the market and sells. So traders are a very significant force in the rural markets, and they are often extremely manipulative. They will practice all kinds of hoarding and everything to hike up the prices. And the other dominant players are the government authorities, the agriculture officers, what we call them as AOs, the veterinary and healthcare veterinary officers. Now these officers have a significant role to play, because the livestock and the livelihoods of the farmers are very often dependent on the agriculture officer. So if they have a good agriculture officer, often work becomes very simple for the farmers, because if there is a unknown pest or something, this agriculture officer guides them on how to do it. So how's the life there? If someone tries to understand how's the life there, so the life in rural setting is full of uncertainty, as because the rainfall pattern has changed, and due to the change in rainfall pattern, cropping pattern has changed, and that gives, no one today really knows that if they sow the crop, will the harvest happen. This gives rise to this uncertainty gives rise to a loss of income, because very often farmers buy seeds and fertilizers and all that, and if the rains just stop midway, then all of that produce goes waste, all of the plants, and this then gets them into debt traps often, and one can hear of these farmer suicides, which again in a different way will give rise to migration to cities. So today, a farmer, often you will see people who have migrated to cities are in the business of raising livestock, cattle, goats, sheeps, and selling them in the cities. That gives them much more income than what they used to have in the rural villages. So what is the business opportunity? Now, first and foremost, the rural people have been an exploited lot for a very long time. Every person comes and promises them big, make some money, and then runs away. So for doing business in rural India, one has to have, you need to stay. You cannot just come and go away. There are too many people who have just come and gone away. It must be having a long-term perspective. It must do with increasing the income of farmers and things, so that the farmer can earn a decent living and not be dependent and not be affected so much by the uncertainties which are around. It must be linked to food processing. We know that around 30% of the waste of the agricultural produce goes waste. If there is a small bit of food processing which happens on solar power, if there are small machines which can just convert those things into and extend the shelf life of that produce, this will be really good. And things which are which can be done through a lot of labor, because labor is available in villages. If something can be done where people can take something, make it compress, make it smaller and sell it off, that's when this kind of industries would really flourish. So while you spot your business opportunity in the rural environment, it's very important for you to be able to know how to sell or how to do business. So while you know the livelihood and what will attract farmers and who are the dominant players, remember the sales process in rural India is totally based on trust. So if you are willing to stay long, if you have something which helps the farmers, then you can definitely have a good going there, farmers, or increase the livelihood. And the sales process or the product and all must be highly innovative. You cannot take something which is urban and give it into the rural. It will not work. I have seen today Indian rural scenario change considerably. There is electricity, there are roads, and there is land, and there's education. Long way to go to become perfect, but things have changed. So the rural population of today has a different expectation, is different, and is connected. The opportunities are immense. So you as an individual, if you want to go in for um, a good rural business, understand the rural profile well, understand the village well, understand the livelihood, understand how do they earn and how do they spend, who are the dominant players in this whole framework, what's the life of the of the farmer or the villager, and then you create your business opportunity. As we know from the there is a in India there are villages. These villages come together and they form what we call mandals. These mandals come together and what are forming a district, and these districts come together and form a state, and many states come together and form the country. So the crux of India is in the village. We have to understand that, we must remember that, and we must do everything possible to integrate rural India to your business cycle and your business offerings, not just treating them as a segment. They are much more than a segment. They need different products, different sales processes.